Hey guys, today I'm going to be replacing a sink that's starting to get old and worn out, and the bottom of it's really starting to look bad. It makes it to where when we try to clean it, it never really looks clean because the rust and the paint is coming off of the finish on the sink. So come and join me and I'll show you how to replace this. These are the parts that we need to replace the sink and the plumbing that's immediately below the sink. These are two new water lines. We're replacing the water lines because you should always replace them if you're going to take them off. Inside here, they have a little rubber gasket that can get damaged or go bad, and after a while, it just really should be replaced anytime you take these water lines off. This connects immediately underneath the sink. It goes up and down to stop the sink. And this is the plumbing below that connects to the drain on the wall. This is going to be the sink that we're going to be replacing the one in the bathroom with. As you can see, this one's nice and clean. There's no rusting on the sink, and it'll be a lot nicer to look at once it's installed. This sink was about $30. This plumbing was about $3. This is about $8, and these were about $7 a piece. So here's the sink we're going to be replacing. If we look down here at the bottom, this isn't actually dirt. This is rust that is starting to perforate the sink paint coating. This is like an enamel coating, and eventually, since the sink is just worn out, that's just a rust that's perforating the coating on the sink. So unfortunately, this sink can still be used, but it doesn't look very good, and it's time to be replaced. We're not going to be replacing this faucet that's on top of the sink here. It's still in pretty good shape, and I like it, so I don't think we're going to be replacing it. Here are some different tools I'm going to be using, with the exception of the light that's not shown, to replace the sink and the plumbing underneath the sink. A pair of slip joint pliers, a crescent wrench, some caulking once it's installed, this to scrape here and get the old caulking off the sink, some PTFE tape for the pipes, and a couple different screwdrivers, because underneath here there are some screws that clamp this sink to the countertop. This plumber's putty is going to go in between the stopping unit here and the sink to create a seal. So here we are under the sink. We're going to get started. But before you start, especially when you're taking these apart, make sure you have some sort of device to catch any water that may be in the plumbing before you take it apart. We're going to be replacing this P-trap here, this tailpiece, and the pop-up assembly that's inside of it. We're going to be replacing the pop-up assembly actuator. And since we're going to be touching these water lines when we take the sink off of the countertop, I'm just going to go ahead and replace these water lines. I'm going to start taking it apart. I'm going to take this joint, and the joint back here off. I did this not too long ago, but I didn't replace the sink at that time because this sink was clogged. So now I'm going to replace the entire unit, and since these are so cheap, these P-traps, I'm going to replace it at the same time. There's a little gasket in here, as you'll see when we take it apart, that could leak if we didn't just replace it. So since these are about $3, I'm going to replace it anyway. These might be too tight where I can't do it by hand. If I remember, this sink was, oh no, I can get that one off. As we discussed, make sure to have something under here. This part of the sink always has water underneath it, as intended, and it has water underneath there, so sewer gases coming from the back part of the drain line don't come up through your sink. Every plumbing assembly in your house has some sort of a P-trap, including your toilet. Inside your toilet, the water actually does this before it goes out and down and into the piping of your house. So we're going to remove this joint as well. I think this one's going to be really tight. So you can see it here, this little green thing that's coming out here is the gasket that seals these and keeps water from pouring out. So as I open this, water might start just coming out a little bit. Next, we're going to take off this back piece. Since there's no more water in the sink, I'm not going to need this until I take these off. These will have water in them. again, each one of these joints has a green gasket that has been shaped after I tightened this last summer when I replaced this. As you can see, this now has a shape in it from being tightened. The new ones won't have that in it. And after you take it off once, it's got that permanent shape in there, which when we put it back on, if it doesn't go in exactly like it was, it will leak. So I think, in my opinion, it's just worth replacing it to make sure it doesn't do any leaking. So I did put this rag in here for two reasons. A, there's a little bit of residual water in this pipe that's dripping down, and B, it smells like sewer gas in here because this pipe is now open to the sewer and it doesn't smell very nice. So next we're going to start taking off the bottom part of the sink here. We're going to remove this, which seals the actuator. And there's a circular ball inside of this joint for the actuator to work. Take this off, take this out. We won't be reusing that. We have a new one to use. And next we're gonna pull this piece off of here. All right, now the bottom piece is loose, but you'll notice it's not coming off. That's because the top piece needs to come out before this tail piece will come out, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But before I do that, I'm going to pull this out. Again, we're not going to be reusing this actuator. So now we've taken the actuator out, so this drain piece will be free. The actuator actually comes into this in the back and holds it down and pushes it up when you're using the sink, and this rod that's in the back of the sink. To actually get this out, this twists off of the tail piece at the bottom. So I'm going to hold the tail piece at the bottom and actually twist it. And you'll see down here that this is going to unscrew from the bottom of the sink. So I'm going to take the water lines off, but before I can do that, I have to turn these water lines off. These valves get turned off by just pulling them. Some might have a 90-degree turn, or they might be a continuous turn valve. Then I'm going to take this crescent wrench and take these off. I want to hold this valve while I'm turning this, so I'm not putting a lot of lateral force either way on this valve, just to keep as much pressure off of the internal plumbing and the wall as possible, and the valve. Next, we're going to go up top and open both the cold and hot valves on the faucet to drain any remaining water from the faucet assembly. So underneath the sink here, we have these units that are attached to the sink. Basically, they just pinch onto the sink, and that's what holds the sink onto the countertop. And there's 2 of them, 3, 4. So I'm going to be removing all 4 of those, and then the sink will be free, and we can remove it from the countertop. We've taken everything that's holding the sink from this countertop, with the exception of the caulking between the sink and the countertop. So I'm going to use this scraper here to loosen up the caulking along the countertop. So that way the sink is free and we can get it off the counter. So these are pretty cheap contractor grade sinks, and because they're cheap, they're just made out of steel that's coated with white enamel, and the emergency drain, which is on the back of the sink, they're not put on there very well. They're put on with a glue, and actually as I was trying to pick it up, it just came right off. So it's probably not too long before this sink would have started leaking anyway, between this sealant here and this tailpiece, which is full of toothpaste and other materials. So here's the underside of the sink and where the water lines connect to. I'm not reusing these water lines, so I'm just going to take them off of here only to get this faucet off of the sink. So these plastic nuts here hold the faucet onto the sink, so I'm just going to take them off and hold from underneath so the faucet doesn't fall on the ground. Just hold the faucet up and taking these plastic nuts off. Earlier I mentioned that there are rubber gaskets inside these hoses, and the reason I'm not reusing them is because they're rubber and they can wear out. Well, this is rubber too, but it's not holding any pressurized water like these water lines are, so it doesn't matter if I reuse this. So next, I'm going to clean the old caulking off of the countertop using this scraper here and get it ready for the new sink to go in. Here we have the new sink with the new emergency drain on the sink with the seal nice and intact, brand new, so we shouldn't have any leak problems. So you can see this sink, nice and clean, should last for another 15 to 20 years. So next I'm going to reinstall the faucet onto the new sink. Line it up as straight as possible, just snug it up. I'm not going to make this extremely tight right now because it may be adjusted just a little bit. But next, I'm going to put the new water lines on it. So when I put the sink onto the counter, I don't have to try to put the water lines on it when I'm laying on my back underneath the sink. So now I'm going to reinstall the water lines onto the water valves, making sure to not cross thread these. That would be a bad day for me if I did that. I'd have to replace this valve if I ruin this thread here. Again, before I put any force on these valves, I want to make sure to hold them from moving side to side or up and down to keep as little stress on them as possible as I'm tightening this. Do note, neither one of these valves require any thread tape because they're compression fittings. If you put any thread tape on these, they will not seal properly. So I'm not going to bolt the sink down to the countertop quite yet, because I might need to make some adjustments back and forth to make sure that the piping fits and that the faucet is straight onto the sink. So I'm going to reconnect the piping to the wall first, and then I'll make my final adjustments, and then I'll bolt the sink down to the countertop. Note, when you go shopping for parts like this tailpiece here, there's several different options. I went to Home Depot and I got one of the cheaper versions. They have a Danco version that is supposedly the Easy Connect actuator here, but I used that most recently and I really didn't like the way that it installed. It didn't stay onto the actuator, which This is the actuator. It turns this, which is sitting in this tailpiece, and clogs your sink when you would like water to be in your sink, and then pushes this piece up when you'd like the drain to drain. So as this goes up, this goes down, clogs the sink. As it goes up, it allows the sink to drain. With that said, the one that I bought previously, Home Depot, had this really poor rubber connection here and didn't work very well. It actually caused, whenever you would try to push this up and down, it would just disconnect, and then it would be really difficult to use it like it was intended. When you put this underneath the sink, there's a little clear washer here that has to go inside of here, otherwise this will leak. But before I even get under there, I'm going to start beginning this process by putting thread tape onto this tailpiece and drain. So before I install this into the sink, I'm going to put thread tape on this tailpiece in 3 different places. I'm going to put it right here where the actuator connects to the back of the tailpiece. I'm going to put it underneath this emergency drain cutout here. And then where this screws onto the sink, I'm going to put it on this thread here to make sure it doesn't leak there as well. So we're going to put thread tape in 3 places, here, here, and on the back of here. So you should put at least 2 wraps on. 3 is what I usually do. Any more than 3 and it's going to make it really difficult to tighten these parts and pieces together properly to get a good seal. But if you put too little thread tape on there, the sink will leak as well. So I'm going to start this process by taking the shipping plastic off of these parts. The sink piece isn't actually blue, it's just covered in plastic. So I'm going to take this off of here. So it'll actually be chrome. Same with the stopper. And then I'm going to install this underneath the sink. So this has to go underneath, and this screws into the top of it. But before I do that, I need to put a little bit of plumber's putty right here in this crevasse, which is going to meet the sink right here to keep it from leaking as well. So because this is actually way too much on here, when this gets pushed down into the sink, a little bit of plumber's putty is going to come out the side here, but that's fine. I'll just clean it up with the razor afterwards. Next, we're going to install the top part of the actuator. To do that, if this isn't already loose, we have to loosen it up. Put it through the hole in the back of the sink here and put it down, and then attach this piece from the bottom. We're then going to install this assembly, which this has to go into the top as well. So we're just going to drop that in there for now and get all these parts and pieces ready to put in. So underneath the sink, we're going to install this on the rod. Checking to make sure that you didn't drop any of the gaskets and that they are inside the sink already. We're going to install the actuator. This clip here is what holds this on the back of here, so it's got to go through this side first. Got to go this side, then into the rod. Then we have to bend it, which you can see takes a little bit of force through there, and slide it. Now I'm going to just barely tighten this on here, but I want to make sure that it's connected to the drain valve. If it wasn't connected correctly, it wouldn't actuate, and I'd be able to pull this out through the top. So it's definitely connected like it should be. And I'm going to tighten this back piece on here, and then we'll put the rest of the drain piping on. going to tighten that up by hand. You should not have to use a wrench on that. If you use a wrench, you'll probably put too much force on it and you could break it and cause a leak. So now we're going to tighten this down. This kit comes with all the parts and pieces you'll need to reconnect the bottom of the tailpiece to the wall piping, but it does come with this piece, which isn't needed. This piece would be if you're installing your piping to piping that's already exists and does not already have this on the wall. However, our piping already has this on the wall, and yours likely will as well, unless you're in a brand new home. You probably won't need this piece, so we're going to set this here for now. There are 3 green gaskets that we'll need to complete this. One of these thin gaskets is going to go in here, and the other thin gasket is going to go into the pipe that connects to the wall. There's a third gasket. It is unlike the other 2 gaskets. You'll notice the opening is a little bit smaller. That's the gasket that goes into the tailpiece coming from the sink. So make sure to use that one there. It won't fit around either one of these. It's just not going to work. To make my life a little bit easier while I'm laying on the ground underneath the sink, I'm going to pre-assemble a couple pieces. I'm going to take this gasket, I'm going to put it in here. Take one of these screw nuts, slide it on here, get it all the way to the edge here. We're just going to, this is difficult to do, this way. All right, we're just going to put this together and just don't cross thread it like I was doing there. But get it ready for installation underneath the sink. I put this nut on here this way with the threads that are going to be facing the wall because it screws onto the wall joint. Then we put the gasket on. So it's pre-installed, so the only one we really have to mess with a lot is the part that goes onto the tailpiece under the sink. So I'm going to take this gasket. Again, this is the gasket that is thicker than the others, and this nut and install it onto the tailpiece. The nut has to go first. The gasket goes onto the tailpiece, and we'll just hold the nut right here. The tailpiece goes into the wall. And to make this really easy, I left the sink loose, so we have a little bit of leeway here that we can put the piping in with. Go ahead and move this gasket down to the pipe. And just start putting these on. I was noticing as I was tightening this down, it didn't quite feel right, and I remembered and felt it, and I had it upside down, so it wasn't going to be correct. The shape should be going towards the sink here to get the proper seal. So we're going to put that back on. Now if I've done everything correctly, and I'm lucky, just a little bit of luck is involved, there won't be any leaks. So I'm going to turn the water valves back on by pushing these. Making sure that there are no leaks up here where the water line connects to the sink. And go ahead and turn the second one on. Again, giving it just a second to make sure that there are no leaks up here or down here where these connect to the wall. There are no leaks there. Now if I'm really lucky, all I will need to have done is hand tighten these if they were put on perfectly. Same with this one, I had to use a wrench on, it just needed a little bit more force. This should only need to be on hand tight. This part in the back where the seal for the actuator is. So we'll go ahead and turn the sink on and test it out to see if there are any leaks. If there are no leaks, then I can attach the sink to the countertop, making any of my final adjustments before I tighten it all the way down. So now I've adjusted the sink
to make sure that it's straight, adjusted the faucet. So the last thing I'm going to do is put these on here again as they were, and then tighten the nuts on the faucet to make sure that it doesn't move.
Lastly, I'm going to put some caulking around the sink so it doesn't leak any water in between the sink and the countertop, just in case there's any splashing. So we're going to take this clear caulking, which when you put clear caulking on, it goes on white, and when it dries, it turns clear. Putting the caulking next to the sink, I'm going to use my finger to just push it into the gap where the sink and the countertop meet, and to make it look a little bit prettier. There's a little bit of caulking on the countertop, but it'll dry clear, and once it's dry, it won't really be seen. So there we have it. We've replaced a sink for less than $75. In my estimation, it would cost you about $400 to have a plumber come out and replace the sink with all the work that's involved plus the sink. And here we have the old sink versus the new sink. As we can see, the old one, the finish on it coming off doesn't look very good, and the new one, bright and shiny.